Hi everybody, and welcome to the last webinar in May for AdEspresso. And today I'm going to welcome Gianluca, who's presented some of our previous webinars. I'll give him an intro in a second, but today we're going to be covering from the North Star to the right Google Ads bid. So we're going to be covering everything to do with optimizing your Google Ads. Just before we get going on that, a little bit of housekeeping as always. The most common question we get asked is, are we recording? Yes, we are. So we put these recordings on our YouTube channel. Just search for AdEspresso. And also, if you go to adespresso.com/webinars, then we put all the recordings there. So you can like knock yourself out and see all our previous webinars with Gianluca there. And final slide for me here is this is very interactive. We want to take your questions at the end. So you'll see in your GoToWebinar panel there's a little questions box. Maybe if you just want to type in there where you're joining us from today, if you can hear our audio okay. But yeah, myself and my colleague Tori will be monitoring the questions as we go along. Then we'll go and present as many as possible to Gianluca at the end there. So Gianluca, welcome. And I'm just going to go and make you a presenter. Here we go. How are you today, Gianluca?
Very well, thank you. Very, very excited to be here.
Okay, I think everybody can now see your screen.
All right, perfect. Let's dive straight into the magic word of picking the right North Star and then diving down to the ideal bid for our Google Ads campaign. Very excited to be here again with you, Paul and Tori. And thank you everyone for joining us. So today we're going to discuss three topics and three topics only. How do we find the right KPI for optimization for the North Star for our operation? How do we pick our attribution model? And then how do we pick the right bidding model? Before we dive in, a couple of words on me. That's a picture of me looking as serious as it gets. My name is Gianluca, as my accent, appearance, and name give out. I'm Italian. My company is called BoosterBox. Prior to BoosterBox, I worked at Google for several years, where I was managing paid media campaigns for Google products in Europe. And also been working as advisor for Google owns equity firm called Capital G. And I've been doing PPC pretty much all my working life. BoosterBox, my company, we are the best scientific performance marketing agency, best according to our mom, but actually we won a few awards, so now it's official. Moms are always right. Said that, let's start by a common pain that we all share. Every time we need to set up a paid media operation, it feels daunting sometimes, doesn't it? You need to try to figure out very big question. What KPIs we should optimize against? Shall we do ROAS or CAC? What does it mean? How do we make sure that we're tracking the right thing? The second question is, we always talk about attribution models. Is last click? We all know it's probably not the ideal model. What are the options on the table, and which one should we pick at which point in time? And then there's a lot of conversation on bidding models. How do we figure out what is the right bidding model? So today we really want to iron out these three mega important questions. What is the right North Star? How do we go about our bidding model, and how do we define the correct attribution model? So let's start by the North Star. So the North Star, for those of you that are a little bit into growth hacking and that sort of jazz, it's a cool term to say, what is our goal really? So what is the metric that we're using to optimize our business? Now, that is a very important element, obviously, and it's not that trivial. In some cases, it's not that simple to identify what metrics we want to use for driving our paid media operation forward. Let me dive in on the option that we have on the table. So the first option that we have is optimizing by cost per acquisition. That's a classic option. It's very easy to implement. and it's a classic option for lead generation business. In this case, we are optimizing for the total cost of our operation divided by the number of acquisition that we're getting. So imagine we are a lead generation business, let's say, for an insurance company. So we're trying to collect contact details for people interested in buying our insurance or for a credit card application. So the overall goal of our business operation is to collect contact details for potentially interested customers. Obviously, analyzing our paid media operation in terms of cost per acquisition for each contact, it's a fairly simple KPI to use. It's very easy to implement, but there's a big drawback in this type of approach. We entirely ignore the quality of each lead that we're collecting, because we are optimizing for number of people filling a form, but then obviously we don't know if the people that we are getting are actually eligible for getting our insurance or for being successful in the credit card application. So we actually don't know how many of these leads will be good and how many of these applications will be successful. So that is a very simple metric to use as a North Star, but obviously, too simple in a way. So the natural next step is probably optimizing for cost per marketing qualified lead. Now, obviously, these metrics, these acronyms that we're using today, different companies are calling these metrics with slightly different names. But fundamentally, the meaning is, in this specific case, as cost per marketing qualified lead, we are still in the lead generation game. So obviously, we're still optimizing for people that are filling a form, for instance. But in this specific case, we're also adding another layer. So we don't simply optimize for the number of forms that we collected, but we also are analyzing how many marketing qualified leads we got, right? So in this specific case, there will be a process of vetting the leads that we're getting and trying to assess how many leads are meeting the criteria that were set by the marketing team. So that is our typical operation, that if we are selling a very complex product where maybe there is a sales process that requires human interaction, there will be a certain set of questions that we're asking our clients, our prospect actually, in order to determine if they are a potentially good lead or not. Probably would be the budget, the number of people working in that company if we are in the B2B side, or it would be, I don't know, the personal financial situation, going back to the example of us issuing a credit card. It doesn't matter. The overall point here is there is a bunch of questions that each one of us, we all know which one is a good client and which one is not a good client. So these are the questions that are determining if the leads that we're getting is a good lead or a bad lead. So how do we implement this from a technical perspective? This is a little bit more tricky, obviously, than the previous metrics, the cost per lead. Sorry, I think I went too far with the slide, sorry. This is the cost per marketing qualified lead is a little bit tricky because it does rely on a leads quality assumption, right? So in this specific case, we are analyzing with an average what it would be the leads quality that we're getting from each channel. So we will go defining that, for instance, on organic traffic, we would expect a better leads quality. Usually on brand traffic, we expect a better leads quality than we're getting on non-branded traffic, or even worse, sometimes on display traffic. So that is the second metric, the cost per marketing qualified leads. Let's move to a more sophisticated metric. And in this case, we're thinking CPPA, cost per paying customer or cost per paying acquisition. This is also called sometimes CAC, CAC, cost per acquired customer. Again, if you ask 100 people, you probably get 100 different acronyms because no one has it figured out entirely, and nobody has a complete truth on this. And probably these are concepts that we all need to apply to different businesses. But the main point here is we want to optimize by each actual paying customer. So I think a good example here, imagine if we are a SaaS business, a software as a service business. In this case, what we want to optimize for is the CPPA or CAC. It's a really good level of optimization because we are analyzing the actual value of a paying customer. So back to the credit card example, right? We will be optimizing for one credit card that actually was issued. Now, the problem with this approach, so obviously this approach is very, very effective because we're optimizing for actual money in the bank, really. But the problem with that approach is the fact that the number of paying customers will be significantly lower than the number of marketing qualified leads or the number of leads. So probably back to the credit card application, we will have 100 leads and 50 marketing qualified leads, but then, I don't know, 10 actually, paying customers, right? That's problem number one. So the numbers that we're using for optimization are getting smaller the deeper we go into the process. So here we are at the paying customer, so obviously the volume is smaller. The second problem we have is that there might be a delay in time between the moment in time where we're getting the lead, where a human is filling the form, and then the moment where the lead is actually qualified, and the moment where the lead is becoming an actual customer. Not to mention the challenges, obviously, of getting all the information in one place. In this specific situation, we will need to use a CRM system, and we need to connect this CRM system back into Google Ads or Google Analytics. So obviously, these are challenges that are making it a little bit more difficult to use this type of approach for everyone. And they make a little bit more difficult to identify and make the right decision. For instance, when it comes to bidding and correctly allocating budget, because we simply have a better data, but in a limited amount, right? If that makes sense. In other words, like pretty much anything in life, if it's good, it makes you, if it tastes good, makes you fat or is illegal, right? I think it was Oscar Wilde, that's something like that in a much better way. There's always a trade-off, and the trade-off here is between the quality of the data versus the quantity of the data that we're getting. Let's go a little bit more deep into this, and let's see the fourth type of metrics. Now, this is something that most of us, we heard about it, right? ROAS, return on advertising spend. ROAS is the ugly version of the return on investment, is the evil twin of the return on investment. I'm saying the ugly version and the evil twin because ROAS, it's a much more crude metric versus ROI, because it's only including advertising spend and not the full cost, right? So the difference between ROAS and ROI is the fact that ROAS, it's using at the denominator only the marketing cost. So in this case, it will be Google Ads, but it's ignoring, for instance, the salary of the Nous team that we're using for optimizing our operation, or it is also ignoring the cost of our agency, the cost of the customer success team, so on and so forth. So every time we think ROAS, obviously we need to remember that ROAS is a different thing that return on investment. But still, let's focus on ROAS for a minute. Now, most e-commerce obviously are optimizing by ROAS. And it's a very accurate level of optimization for e-commerce. However, there are a couple of problems with ROAS. First of all, revenue can be scattered across multiple elements in a marketing operation. So let's imagine multiple keywords in a specific campaigns. We will have revenue that will be scattered everywhere. Secondly, we might also have outliers, and that could bias the judgment on a specific campaign. We might also find that cheaper items sells better online, making ROAS looks better, but potentially this is reducing our bottom line. If this item, maybe they have a higher cost of acquisition and lower margin, so we must take that into account. So in a pure e-commerce business, ROAS, it's very easy to implement, but in the cons, if we are thinking about a non-pure e-commerce business, in this case, obviously we need to take in consideration offline conversion, and that's not that trivial to implement, right? Because the offline conversion, it is a feature that can be implemented in Google Ads, but it does require some tracking capabilities. So despite ROAS being the most used KPI by our e-commerce business, I don't have a stat, but I would say 95%, the vast majority of e-commerce business in my experience are using ROAS for optimization. And it does provide a good level of optimization, but it's definitely not immune from cons, from detracting factors. So there is a better metrics than ROAS, and that is LTV divided by CAC. So a better version of ROAS would be taking in consideration two elements. A, the future margin that we're getting from a certain user, and the future revenue that we're getting from a specific user, and B, the margin on the product. Let me give you more details about that. If we're optimizing by LTV, what we're doing, we're taking a smarter version of ROAS in consideration. While ROAS, it's only capturing the revenue on the advertising spend. If we think LTV, that actually is a much smarter, because it does capture also the likelihood that a certain customer will come back in the future and will buy again. Furthermore, in the LTV, we're not only looking at revenue, but we're also considering the margins, right? So we can see what margin we made on the first transaction. And all these considerations together then make LTV a much more accurate element for optimization. Now, the cons obviously are the same that we mentioned for ROAS, because there's also still the risk. I'm going back one slide, right? We still have LTV could be scattered across multiple keywords. We still have a risk of being biased by outliers. And plus, the likelihood of customers to come back is based on an average. So obviously that will not always be perfectly clear, and it might take a long time to move to ROAS. Now, in this little graph here, I'm trying to give a summary of the situation. So obviously, in the ideal scenario, we are up here in the ideal position where we are optimizing by the most sophisticated metrics, LTV divided by CAC, and we're doing that not at overall level. So we don't have one LTV by CAC goal for our entire operation. So we don't have one North Star, but defined that the North Star is LTV divided by CAC. Then we have different targets for different segments. And by segment here, I mean different channels. So we could have different targets for Google and Facebook, or for different countries, or for different type of customers, whatever makes sense in your business from a segmentation perspective. What I really want to underline here is the fact that this is a process. So you shouldn't probably set up your operation from the get-go and aim to get to a very sophisticated metrics, because it's way more accurate, but a little bit complex to implement from a technical perspective, and it does require a lot of data points because the data are scattered everywhere. So you need a larger investment. So if you're starting with an e-commerce, definitely ROAS is the way to go. If you are at a more advanced stage on your e-commerce and you have developers and you have enough investment, then you want to dare in a more sophisticated area, and you want to embrace thinking LTV and margins. On the other hand, if you are in the lead generation game, you want to start with a CPA, and if you already are in a more advanced situation, you want to test cost per marketing qualified lead, or even CPPA, and you want to play that even at segment level. So to simplify and to summarize to the question, how do I pick the right North Star? Let's split the word in two. If you're an e-commerce, then start with ROAS, and if you feel wild, embrace LTV to CAC. If you're in a lead gen business, use CPA or CPL, 2 different names for the same thing, as a starting point. If you want to get more sophisticated, move to CPPA, aka CAC. So these are the 2 macro guidelines on how we can pick the right North Star. So you can see already that there's no perfect KPI for all possible solution. It really depends where we are in the level of sophistication of our business. Therefore, it does depend on whether you're just starting out or if you are more established. Now, assuming that we picked the right North Star for where we are in the life of our business, let's move forward and discuss the next point, attribution models. Now, attribution models obviously are a super important topic in today's marketing. We all heard about it. The best analogy that I heard someone on Twitter, I cannot remember was the author of this, was drinking. So let's imagine Kermit the Frog got drunk yesterday night. He went out to a bar to celebrate quarantine being over, and he started drinking an Appletini. Then he got, what is this, dry martini, James Bond style. Then he got a glass of red wine, then a couple of pints, and then ended up with 2 nice Prosecco champagne. So what got Kermit drunk last night? Was it a champagne? Probably not, right? That would be an oversimplistic view of life. But this is what a last click word actually is defining, right? In a last click word, which is what unfortunately still today most businesses are using, we would give all the attribution, whatever may get Kermit drunk was only the last 2 glasses of Prosecco or champagne that he had. And we all have an attribution issue. I can challenge 90% of businesses that are in this call today. We all have an attribution problem. Why? What is the smoking gun? Go in your Google Analytics and type in the top corner on the left, path length. If you see something like that, a situation where the first path, meaning instances where only one iteration between the first click and the conversion happen, is not 100%, then it means that you have an attribution issue, because it means that in this specific case, 45-ish% of the sales are coming only from one path length. So there was one user interaction, so one click drove a sale. But in another 60%, in another 55% of instances, there were multiple interactions, right? So the lower is this number, it means the higher the chances that your users are not coming to your website and buying, straight off the bat, but probably are coming twice or more. So the more often they're coming, the more likely is that you have an attribution challenge, right? Because then basically they're having more drinks to get drunk, to go back to the Kermit analogy. The second element to see the smoking gun here is to type in the top corner of your GA conversion path. So in this case, by typing conversion path there, you can see all the instances where different channels were involved in a sale. And you will see something like that. So you will see cases where there were users that clicked, in this case, they type on paid search and then direct. So in a last click word, we are giving 175 sales to direct, right? So which is obviously wrong. All right, so establish what attribution is and why very likely we all have an attribution issue and how we can see the smoking gun in our operation. I want to spend a couple of words on what attribution models we have on the table. So we can define 2 types of attribution models. Heuristic, which is a fancy word for top-down, and algorithmic attribution model, which is a fancy word for bottom-up. I'll give you a more specific example in a minute, so I'm going to be clear on that. The heuristic models are the models that we all know and love. There's a beautiful article from Avinash Kaushik. If you guys type Avinash attribution model, you will get to this link and you will see this image. And I find this a very, very effective way to describe the attribution model. So the last click model, we've seen it, was the last two classical of Prosecco that made Kermit Grant. And that's obviously a too simple model. This is the most used, but one of the most stupid model that we could use. On the opposite end of the spectrum, we have a first touch model. A first touch model is something that is often used by organizations that are very heavily skewed towards growth. So, you know, a classic hot startup that is all about grow, and it's a little bit putting on the side efficiency for a minute. Often we find this model in this type of organization. And in this case, obviously, we are assigning 100% of the attribution to the first touch, right? So to the very first click. Everything in between, it's a mixed version where we're assigning a little bit here and a little bit there. These are called heuristic models because we are simply assigning the value of the sales, the conversion, based on the point in, it's a very simplistic way of seeing life because we are simply assigning the weight based on the point in time where a certain event happened, right? So if the first, we're gonna give a weight to the first channel, the second channel, the third, and the fourth. And this is always a top-down definition that we make. A not too bad model, it's the so-called U-shaped or position-based. I also heard some people defining that as the bathtub model because it looks sort of a bathtub in a way. In this model, we are assigning 40% of the credit to the first and the last attribution point, and then the 20% is distributed evenly on the remaining channels. And this is why these are all top-down models, because we are assigning top-down 40% and 40%. We are not really measuring real-life data to come up with that 40%, right? So this is particularly the position-based model and the time decay model. In my advice is if you are in a rush and you're not able to pick up a better model, which are the algorithmic model that I'm going to share in a second, U-shaped, aka position-based, and time decay are much better model than last click or first touch. So you will make a mistake, but this will be a smaller mistake than the last click. Let's move quickly to the algorithmic attribution model. At Boosterbox, my employer, we had very strong successes using an algorithmic model based on a Markov chain approach. We published the code behind this model, and there's plenty of material on our LinkedIn channel, or if you Google me, you will find that. This is not the only algorithmic model that is out there. You can use the Google data-driven model, which is based on the secret sauce of Google. There are also other models, but the main difference between the heuristic model and the algorithmic model is the fact that in the algorithmic model, you're measuring for every single interaction the weight that you want to apply, and then you aggregate this weight and you assign them. So the difference, to go back to a summary, how do you pick the right model? We can see something similarly to the graph that we see before. We can have on Y attribution model. So the most simple one is probably the last click. Again, very easy to implement, but very likely will be misrepresenting the attribution because it will underestimate assisting campaign. Linear, it's a little bit better than the last click, but again, it's a very simplistic way of life, and it will bias also the budget allocation. Position-based or time decay, I think there are decent representation. Still, they will misrepresent the correct attribution because it does rely on averages, that 40% that we said earlier that are just top down, so therefore are a simplification of reality. Non-heuristic, aka algorithmic model, are providing a way more accurate level of attribution. The problem with that, these are difficult to implement. They require coding, they require some development efforts. They bring way better results, but they are more suitable for larger organization, or in any ways organizations that are investing a significant amount of time and effort when it comes to their Google ads. So these are difficult to implement. On the X here, we actually have the opportunity, different level of granularity. We can have data in the interface of Google Ads, in the interface of Google Ads and Analytics, or injected across all platforms. So imagine also Bing, Facebook, Criteo, everything. For non-heuristic model, so to be in the ideal position, in some cases, actually the technological solution to inject the correct data back into the platforms is not only not trivial, but actually non-existent. So there are some technological barriers to get there. To give you a specific example, it is not possible to see in Facebook and Criteo and Google Analytics your non-heuristic computed sales to be injected directly across all platforms, unless you're using third-party layers and a very, very complex level of data layering. So to summarize, how do we pick the right attribution model? Again, similar to what we said earlier, there's no absolutely right or absolutely wrong answer. It really depends where you are in the life of your business. So you want to start with something simple. Probably you already started with last click. Move to position-based or time decay. That would be already a much better step in the right direction. And then if you are at a later stage of your operation, you can also move to a non-heuristic type of solution. So these are the options that we have on the table when it comes to attribution model. All right, now that we have clarified that last click is an absolute horror and position-based is much better, then we know that one day we want to move to algorithmic models if we are in a more sophisticated approach. So by now, we should have a better understanding on how do we pick the right North Star, what is the right KPI for optimization. Done that, we can define how do we pick our attribution model. And now the last step for building our belief system is how do we pick the right bidding model. Paul and Tori, you guys might remember, we used exactly the same analogy a few weeks back when we were discussing how do we set up a bidding model, right? An analogy that I find simple enough to explain my mom. Actually, this is something I actually used last Sunday. There are three ways to define bidding model. Similarly to gear system for cars, you can have manual gear, automatic gear, or you can have your car running in autopilot. So similarly, you can have manual bidding, you can use automatic bidding, or you can use the Google Smart Bidding solution. So really, that is something similar to an autopilot. Let's dive in on each option. So manual bidding, non-Google defined. In this case, you are bidding manually. The pros of this type of approach is that by bidding manually, obviously you can customize the bidding. You can consider disrupting events. So the times that we're all living obviously are unprecedented. So obviously that's something that you want to take in consideration, and you can take in consideration only if you're using manual bidding. But even seasonality or special discounts or weather condition. There is a famous example from Fred Valles in his book. He's referring to a ski resort. If a ski resort is using manual bidding as opposed as using Google automated bidding solution, they can take in consideration, for instance, the weather forecast or the snow condition, and they can decide to bid more or less for a specific weekend in order to attract more or less potential traffic. So the main advantage of manual bidding is the fact that you can customize it, right? You are in full control. What's the problem with that? That's absolutely not sustainable for larger accounts. That's something that will drive you crazy if you are running a large operation. So don't do that if you're running a large operation. And obviously, this is ignoring entirely Google information on audiences. So Google knows pretty much, not everything, but a lot of the user information. Google knows the user browser, the location, the mobile operator, sorry, the mobile system that the user has. So these are all a bunch of information that could play an effect on what we're selling, right? Imagine the operating system or the user location, how important they can be for certain specific system, for certain specific businesses. So the manual non-Google bidding, ignoring, obviously, it's very, very customizable in the pros, but in the cons, it's not sustainable for larger account and is ignoring key information that only Google has. The second option that we have on the table is the automated non-Google bidding. This is a better, but to be honest, it's just different approach. Here, we are still the one deciding to bid by using a specific set of rules. These are additional to the manual bidding model, and it's also customizable in case of disrupting events, and it also can be used on larger accounts. So automated bidding, non-Google, way better than manual bidding. By the way, to clarify, by manual bidding, I mean we go in the account and we manually type, I want to be $1 for this keyword and $2 for these other keywords. In the automated, we're using a script or a set of rules to do that. Again, if you guys refer to the webinar, how to define the right bidding model that Paul and I and Tori, we shared a few weeks ago, all the details are there on how you actually go and implement this specific part. The cons still lacks the Google audience related information that we said earlier. The third approach, the Tesla car on autopilot, is the Google Smart Bidding. Here, we fully trust Google. The pros, that requires limited amount of data and actually time. We just set it up and then, we just trust the car to drive in the right direction. And it literally is, obviously, Google literally knows the auction from the inside out. The cons, that takes time to be trained, right? So machine learning is using algorithms that requires data and time to be crunched. So to learn and to kick in on positive effect. And another cons, it does rely on historical series. So it tends to ignore disruptive events in the historical series. It's like relying on historical series. It's like running forward, but you're actually looking backward and you're trying to predict the future by looking backward. So it does work most of the cases, but if there are dramatic changes in the historic series, obviously, that's a big challenge. So back to the original question, how do we pick the right bidding model? We can think of something like that. We can have two types of KPIs, target CPA or target ROAS. And in the target ROAS family, we can divide it by ROAS or LTV to CAC. In the target CPA, we can divide it by CPA, cost per marketing qualified lead, or CPPA. And then we need to pick if we want the manual non-Google, the automated non-Google, or the Google Smart Bidding. My suggestion is, I cannot think of any case where I would prioritize the manual non-Google over the automated non-Google. But I can see how for certain businesses, the Google bidding could be a better solution versus the automated non-Google bidding. So that's something that you want to test. In this specific case, if you are newer, you probably want to test some Google bidding solution. If you're newer to Google, or if you're running a smaller operation, you want to test the Google bidding or the manual. if you feel more adventurous and you want to be in control and you don't want to drive a self-driving car, but you actually want to drive it because you feel you are, you want to be a Formula One pilot, in that case, for higher performance, if you have time to invest and budget, then experiment testing automated non-Google versus the Google bidding. So again, it really depends where you are in the sophistication of your operation, but these are the three options that you have on the table. That's it. This should give you a better understanding of how do we pick the right North Star, how do we pick the right attribution model, and what option we have on the table when it comes to automated bidding. If you have any question, feel free to shoot an email to this alias growth@boosttheboxdigital.com. I will be happy to take any follow-up question, but we do have time for Q&A now. So if you have any question, I'll be happy to answer.
That's awesome, Gianluca. Thanks very much for that. And I think it's one of the key things, and I cover this on Facebook ads, is that you really need to understand what your objective is, what your goal is, and then how you're going to measure that, what your attribution is, and then everything kind of falls into place from there. Everything is then just like just go through the process of setting up the ads, but you really need to have those goals, and everybody needs to be on board with the attribution there. So we'll go to Q&A in a second, but just I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. So I'd like to offer everybody a 14-day free trial of AdEspresso, and also 30% off if you decide to use it. We cover both Facebook and Google Ads. We've got a very easy to use graphical interface, very strong on the reporting, just like Gianluca's covered today. So I think a lot of people could find that useful for your main digital marketing channels there. So just go to adespresso.com/AE webinar. And also, if you think that this webinar has been useful, but you're like, oh my God, I need some actual one-on-one help, we're here to help. We don't just provide software at AdEspresso, we also have some marketing services. So there's three things we offer. The first is campaign reviews, very tactical. These are like 10-minute videos covering your individual campaign, and we can tell you whether you're on the right track or exactly what to change. We also do one-to-one power hour, like coaching calls over Zoom, and we can go through your high-level strategy and answer any questions that you've got. And finally, we've got a concierge service, which is like an agency service where we can actually run the ads for you. It's just like a stripped-down service. So it's more than like self-serve, but we're not quite like a full agency that does video production and things like that. If you're interested in those, you can drop me a message. You'll see there, paul@adespresso.com. Otherwise, you can just go to find out more about it at the tour page at AdEspresso that you see on the screen there. And a little heads up for our next webinar. We're going back to Facebook ads next time, and I'll be running that one. We're going to talk about how to reduce your Facebook advertising costs by using split testing, or what some people call A/B testing. So you can register for that in the same place as this webinar. Just go to adespresso.com/webinars there. So yeah, thank you. If anybody's got any questions, if you want to put them in the chat box there, I can see some coming in already. Just a reminder, I've got Beatrix asking here, will there be a recording? Yes, there is. I'm going to send that to everybody by email, but also if for some reason you don't get it, just go on to our YouTube channel, just search for AdEspresso, or go to adespresso.com/webinars. All our webinars are there. So just got a message from John. John's joined us from Ireland, so welcome, John. And then an interesting question here for you from Birgit. She's saying, how do you decide what to optimize for in a case of a creative business such as fine art? And I certainly get lots of clients like this where either they're selling offline or there's a very long sales process. So any kind of tips on for artists, how they can work out their attribution models there?
All right, for artists, you said, yeah?
Yes, they're doing like fine art. So I don't know whether she's actually getting people visit the studio or whether she's selling online. But like, for instance, could she be measuring something else like event responses, or what do you do if there's like a long sales process online there?
Yeah, that's a super interesting question. Thank you. We actually had this exact case in the past, and that is a very challenging one for a couple of reasons. The first one, you're selling the purest form of magic, really. something that is very difficult that people will step in, see it, and buy in one go. So what is important to take in consideration is the fact that the sales cycle will be longer. In this case, you want to stay, and it does require, in most cases, some human interaction because you're explaining the most complex product, one of the most complex products that is out there. So I would definitely go for a lighter form of conversion. And by lighter, I mean something in the simpler example that we're seeing. So something in the lead generation game. And I will optimize in terms of North Star by a lead, right? So someone that is interested in knowing more about a specific piece of art or a specific exhibition. That still might be a little bit too heavy even. So you might want to optimize for something even lighter than that. So people that are potentially interested in your newsletter even, or people that are engaging for enough time on your content. Definitely as a first step, I will try to optimize by CPA, so number of leads or cost per leads as a North Star. And if that still doesn't capture enough volume, I will move to something even lighter. So for instance, people that sign up to a newsletter. The second element that you need to take in consideration here at this point is the attribution model. And you want to have an attribution model that is a bit more holistic, so that does take in consideration multiple steps. So I will definitely start with position-based, and I will not do potentially here an algorithmic model because you will need a lot of data to train that. And I'm assuming that even if you're running a larger operation, still we're talking about buying art online, where usually, we're not talking about thousands of sales per day. So I would recommend you a position-based type of model. Position-based because here the funnel will be someone seeing art, for instance, on Facebook or a more visual channel, then engaging on Google, and then potentially finalizing the final contact on a different, coming from organic or direct even. And in terms of bidding model, this is very, very challenging. Assuming that there are not an infinite amount of data, I would probably use one of the smart bidding solution here, and I will optimize that by volume of conversions. So to summarize, KPI, CPA, attribution model, position-based, and bidding model, maximize conversion within the smart bidding family.
Thank you for that advice. And something that I've seen on just digital marketing strategy in general is it's quite hard to purely sell online very high ticket items. So depending on the price of the art there, definitely think about event responses, those newsletters, or if you are selling online, then think about, can you sell like prints, posters, postcards, just to get that initial sale, then work up to the big ticket items. It's easier both from a psychology point of view to get people to make a small purchase than a large purchase, but also you've got much more data to work with. So we'll move on now. We've got a question from Dorcas just on Google Smart Bidding. Does the advertiser have control on the pricing of the bid, or does Google set the bidding price for you there?
There are some levels of control. You can define what is the target CPA that you're willing to pay, or you can set some cutoff points on, for instance, you can maximize, you can tell Google not to bid more than a specific amount. So you do have a certain layer of control from that perspective. There are some rules that I guess probably are more suggestions that Google is giving on the ratio between, for instance, the target CPA and the budget that you're setting. So the budget of a specific campaign that is running on a defined target CPA should be, I think it's 20-fold the target CPA. Take all of that with a pinch of salt. But really the message there is, if you are setting up a campaign with $100 budget, your target CPA should be in the 10, 12, 15. if you have a $100 budget with a target CPA of $100, you're not really giving Google too much room for testing and making mistakes in the beginning, right? And it does need to make that type of mistake in the beginning. So you want to make sure that you're keeping the ratio as high as possible between the budget that you're setting on a given campaign and the target CPA that you set in there. So yeah, so the short answer to this question is yes. There's a margin of freedom that we as human, we can tell the machine what are our limits. Do take in consideration the fact that there must be a ratio between the budget and the target CPA.
Thank you. And I just got a follow-up message from Birgit, who helping with the art there. She says, "Mille grazie." So she's saying thank you there. Another little message from John, who's joined us from Ireland. He's saying, really informative, and he saw you at a Google shopping conference in Dublin a few years back, and you were speaking. So it sounds like he's met you there. I don't know if he was sharing a couple of pints of Guinness or not, but he's also asking whether it's possible to get like the slide deck. So maybe if you just want to share the best way for people to get in touch with you there.
Sure. Yeah. I think maybe we can publish. We're gonna publish these slides on our SlideShare channel. So if you search for Boost the Box there, you will find them. I think we'll publish them tomorrow morning, which is in 12 hours.
Great. And yeah, if anybody's got any follow-up questions as well about anything, they can always email paul@adespresso.com and I can forward on anything there. Question from Sharon. This is quite broad, so we'll keep it just quite high level, but she's asking for any thoughts on running cool campaigns to generate leads there. So I don't know if this is something that you do and if it's something that you use in your kind of attribution or optimization at all.
Well, that's a very tough question. Well, I would say Facebook leads ads are a really good tool. So I think, Paul, you can really jump in on that. To stick on Google Ads, I think Google Ads, it's a very powerful tool also for lead gen, right? My general advice would be focus on non-obvious keywords. So try to probably, whenever you're writing down the list of potential keywords, there are certain keywords that are not coming to mind immediately, but maybe the one that are coming to mind after 3, 4, 5, 10 minutes that you're doing your brainstorming. And there you tend to pop into keywords that are a little bit less competitive, right? So let's say if you're doing lead gen for credit card, as an example, the first keyword you will do will be new credit card or apply for a credit card or best credit cards, and maybe more, I guess, lateral thinking, that's a horrible expression, type of keywords probably will be how do I finance my next trip, or I don't know, financing option on a car, or really thinking on the reason of people to need a credit card, right? So you could try to focus on these type of keywords. So I gave you a really generic answer, but to be fair, you asked a really tough question. So if you want to give more details, I'm happy to provide a more specific example.
Excellent. And you're correct. I ran a lead generation Facebook ads webinar last month. So if anybody goes to our YouTube channel to search for AdEspresso, you'll probably find that one, or yeah, go to adespresso.com/webinars and you could look at how to run some lead ads on there. And certainly it's a good tactic running Facebook ads to go and get leads there that you can then go and call there. So we've got I think we've got last 2 or 3 here. So Daniel's asking, should we take into consideration competitive metrics like search impression share when choosing bidding strategy?
It really depends on specific situation. I can think of 2 cases where I would do that. Case number 1, if this specific keyword is cow that you want to milk, meaning that this specific keyword is super profitable for you, and you want to make sure you're not leaving money on the table, and you want to make sure that you are you're squeezing every single possible impression there. So in that case, you want to absolutely have a program in order to increase your CTR, to squeeze every possible clicks from those impressions, and B, keep an eye on impression share to make sure that you are there in every auction where you could potentially be. The second case, and that is the most common case where I would take a look at impression share. The second option is a situation where a specific keyword is strategic from a branding perspective. Now, don't get me wrong. Sometimes, when you are at a dinner party, you don't have way, and you want to open a bottle, but nobody has the tool, so you end up using a shoe or bumping the bottle against the wall to take out the cork. Using Google Ads from branding's perspective, it feels very similar. Google Ads is not per se, especially search, a branding tool. But still, sometimes there are specific keywords that are strategic from a business perspective. Imagine the classic situation where your manager's manager makes, really wants you to make sure that you always appear on that specific word. Sometimes that's the brand name, right? So in these cases, a really good friend is the impression share combined with the auction insight report, where you can really see what is going on your impression and who are the competitors that are popping out and you want to look in this specific case not only at the impression share but also at the outranking share. So all the cases where your competitors are outranking you. So to summarize, case number one, if you struck gold and you have a profitable keywords where your impression share is not 100%, then obviously make sure that you're increasing the impression share. And case B, if a specific keyword is strategic for the business from a, I'm going to call it branding perspective, quote unquote, then look at the impression share, but even better, at all the metrics in the auction insight and particularly at the outranking share.
Awesome, thank you. So I think we've got time for one more question, and this is probably a whole webinar on this topic. But Ali's asking, how does Google Analytics help to understand the results? So I think we've just got a couple of minutes left, so maybe if you've just got a couple of key tips on how to use GA to help with your attribution there.
All right, so the question will be on how to use GA for attribution.
How do you use Google Analytics to help you understand the results?
All right, super. So if you can do only one thing on Google Analytics to understand better results of your campaign, write down the following three words, model, comparison, tool. So type for that in the top left corner of your GA, you will find the model comparison tool. That will allow you to compare the words as you were, let's say you're running with last click, you could see what the word will look like if you were running in position based or first click or other models. So I always do the following. If I'm running, let's say I'm auditing an account for a company and this is a last click, right? Most likely, I would compare last click versus first click and versus linear and position based. In most cases, the result of linear and position based will be very, very similar. So at that point, you can pick either, but you want to pick position based. And you will see a very large difference between first click, last click, and position based. So this is, if there's one thing that you can do in GA, this is the thing, because this, if you haven't done it on your operation, this would really open your eyes. And you will think, campaigns that you thought up until yesterday, this campaign is not working, suddenly actually are, much better. Or on the other hand, this campaign is killing it in a last click word, suddenly actually this campaign is, it's a little bit more selfish and it's benefiting of the help of another campaign, another channel. So even if you're doing this type of analysis once per quarter from a budget allocation perspective only, that's something extra. I cannot think of 5 minutes analysis that will bring more value when it comes to GA management for your paid media operation.
Awesome. So I think that we've come to the end of our hour together now. So thank you very much, Gianluca, for your amazing presentation. Also, your patience answering all the questions today. And sorry to anybody that we didn't answer any, if we couldn't get around to your question. But like I said, just a reminder that Paul at adespresso.com with any follow-up questions. And if you go onto the AdEspresso website, just go to the webinar section. We'll put the replay there. We try and aim for a couple of hours, but certainly within 24 hours. So thank you everybody as well for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, everyone.